Hello everyone, this is Angela and welcome to my channel. Please be sure to like, subscribe, comment, and click the notifications bell so that you'll know whenever I upload any new content. Today's video will take a brief look at how the economics of polygamy plays out when there is no currency involved and everyone lives exclusively off of resources. A lot of people who promote polygamy will often advocate for exclusively living off of the land, living off grid, and using resources as opposed to using currency. A little while ago, I did a video about polygamy and economics where I provided a detailed breakdown of what happens when a society chooses to exist in such a manner. The end result was scarcity. So let's see what happens when we trade the dollars in and use acres of land instead. So let's get into it. Okay, so what we're seeing here is an economic chart. On the left side is the monogamous community, and on the right side is the polygamous community. So let's look at the top of it first. We see that both communities are beginning with a plot of land that is 1,000 acres each. For those who may not already know it, each person on the planet needs the resources from at least 5 acres of land in order to survive. Of the 5 acres, more than half or 2.5 of those acres will be used to cultivate food. The other 3 or so is for shelter, clothing, medicine, and so forth. Additionally, there are approximately 37 trillion acres of land on Earth. Some of this land cannot be inhabited because it may literally have a swamp that's filled with alligators and snapping turtles on it. Or it may contain rainforests where cutting down the trees will bring about ecological disaster. It may be land where cattle and sheep and goats need to graze. You get the point. So this means that of the 37 trillion acres, only a certain percentage can be occupied by humans, and only a certain percentage of that land can be cultivated for food production. I felt the need to point all of this out because I often notice a lack of economic acumen in people who advocate for polygamy. And I say that very respectfully. You see, everything on this planet has its limits. The population of adults who are currently 50 years old right now in 2022 will not remain 50 years old in 2023 or 2024. As they grow older, as time goes on, they will grow older. And also, as time goes on, their population will shrink, you see. So likewise with land, we are going to see what happens as the population grows. Because, see, the capacity of the land will not grow with the population. In fact, it shrinks as time progresses too. So with that in mind, let's move forward. Let's take a look at the first line. This represents the first generation of people in each community. We're going to assume that the adults in the first generation are 20 years old. There are 40 people on the monogamous side and 90 people on the polygamous side. Each person needs 5 acres of land to survive, right? So on the monogamous side, this means that 40 people multiplied by 5 acres per person means that 200 acres of land is needed by the first generation. However, what you will see is that 250 acres of land is being used, and here's the reason why. Each household needs acreage in order to make repairs to their dwellings and in order to maintain it. So that's why the number shows 250. And this is because there are 10 households of 4 people each, 2 adults and 2 children. So when we apply that same standard to the polygamous side, 90 times 5 is 450 acres. But you will see that there are 500 acres being used, and it's for the exact same reason. The shelter needs to be repaired, it needs to be maintained, and it takes acreage to do that. And, other stuff too. They're living off the land, so they're going to need firewood to stay warm. They're going to need firewood to cook, that kind of stuff. So that's why there are an additional 5 acres per household, or a total of 50 acres on each side added to the number. Okay, so if those acres are not set aside, then what it would mean is that the people, for an example, would have to chop down an apple tree to get wood to repair a hole in the floor or the roof. Like the monogamous side, there are 10 households, except each home on the polygamous side has a man who's the husband, his 4 wives, okay, and each wife has a child. So there is a total of 9 people per household. So already the monogamous side has used 1/4 of the land available to them, and the polygamous side has used 1/2. So let's say there are 20 years between each generation. Okay? And we will keep the population growth rate steady. So let's take a look at the second generation. By now, the adults of the first generation are about 40 years old. Okay? And we're in the second generation. There are currently 80 people on the monogamous side and 180 people on the polygamous side in the populations. At this point, the monogamous side is using up half of their land, half of the 1,000 acres, and the polygamous side is at full capacity. As you see, the polygamous side is highlighted in yellow, the color associated with caution. This is because they have no acres left in their community to allocate to the next generation. Unless there are changes, there will be a crisis. Okay? Meanwhile, the monogamous community is functioning well, and they have plenty of land to support the next generations of their population. So let's move to the next generation. What we see here is that the population of the monogamous community now has 120 people. They are using 750 acres out of the 1,000 acres for their land. They may have to be a little mindful about their population growth at this point, but at any rate, they still have enough land to support another generation at this point. Now, let's go to the polygamous side. Their population is now at 270 people. They need an additional 500 acres in order to maintain their lifestyle, but they do not have it. They are currently in a crisis. What we see is this is what is meant by the term overpopulation, okay? It means that there are more people than there are resources to adequately support them. It is around this time within a polygamous population that the people, particularly the youth, will begin to migrate away from their community in search of land and resources and opportunities that they can claim as their own, okay? Additionally, this is when multifamily dwellings begin to develop, and they'll have multiple generations living within them because there's simply not enough land to support giving the population their own household. Add to it, since it takes 5 acres of land per person and 2.5 of them are needed for food, there will be a political crisis, as land that is needed to provide shelter, clothing, and medicine will now be converted for agricultural purposes, because all of these people will need to get fed. A lot of times, polygamous societies are very staunch in their beliefs, so in some cases, not every single case, I want to make sure that's clear. Some, but not all, some. This is when extremism will begin to show. And this occurs because people are doubling down on their staunch beliefs as opposed to accepting the economic reality as it reveals itself to them. And in doubling down on their beliefs, they will often blame others for their economic plight as opposed to understanding how they played a role in their own crisis. Some will even invade other communities and conveniently begin to overtake the land. So let's move ahead to the 4th generation. By this time, 80 years would have passed, and the first generation of adults are now 100 years old. So the monogamous population has 160 people. They have used up all of their land. Unless something happens, then they will not have land for the next generation or the 5th generation, right? The polygamous side, on the other hand, ran out of land in the second generation. And by the third generation, they attempted to cope with the scarcity by converting land that was intended for clothes and medicine into agricultural land so that everyone in the population could have food to eat. Now they are facing another crisis. It takes 2.5 acres of land to create enough food for each person to eat. Now that their population is at 360 people, unless something changes, they are not going to have enough land to cultivate the amount of food that is sufficient to feed each person. So, most people in the world do not live to be 100 years old. So if this chart were to continue into the 5th generation, we will see that the population growth pattern will reverse to account for the deaths of the first generation of people. And since they are no longer alive, they no longer need 5 acres of land to survive. So their land allotments will be returned to the community, which will give the next generation the land that they will need in order to survive. On the monogamous side, this very thing happens. The first generation passes away, their land is returned to the community, and then put to use by the young people in the 5th generation. If we continue this economic model as is, we will see that the population is sustained by the 4th generation on the monogamous side, and they will perpetually have land available for each generation for the next years to come. However, on the polygamous side, even though the first generation of adults pass away from natural causes at the ripe age of 100 years, even though the first generation of adults pass away from natural causes at the ripe age of 100 years old, there is no land available for the 5th generation. In fact, there was no land available for the 3rd generation or the 4th. The 1,000 acres of land was used up by this community by the 2nd generation. Okay, I've analyzed polygamy from an assortment of angles, and consistently it shows a crisis occurring around the 3rd generation. Everything from scarcity of funds, scarcity of resources, scarcity of unrelated people to marry, leading to cousins getting married, a bride scarcity, an abundance of males. I know it seems strange in a bride scarcity, but when you see how polygamy works out, when you actually put the concept to the test, you'll see how it produces a bride scarcity while at the same time leave an abundance of men. Okay, so going back to what I was saying, so for that reason there will be a scarcity of unrelated people to marry, and this leads to cousins getting married, and it also leads to a rise in birth defects and so forth. So once again, polygamy shows more losses than gains. And for the people that support polygamy, that think that they can just buy a plot of land and live exclusively off the resources, listen, they will reach a major economic crisis by the 3rd generation. And listen, this video is not a judgment for or against polygamy. I understand that consenting adults will do whatever they want whenever they feel like it. No law will stop it. No law of nature, no law of man will stop it. However, and in all fairness, every decision has a cost. The rapid resource depletion that leads to scarcity is the common economic outcome for communities that choose a polygamous lifestyle. It is for this reason that I feel when people choose to be polygamous, they need to endure the outcome of their decisions by using their own resources. If it means that 18 people will have to cram into a house that was only designed to house 4 people, then this is what they will need to be prepared for. And I'm not saying this to be harsh. I'm saying it simply to be fair. I mean, listen, if a group of people want to live in a polygamous manner, then so be it. However, I feel that the supporters of this lifestyle, the people that are advocating for it, should be equally prepared to deal with the aftermath of their polygamous lifestyle choices, independently, on their own, independent of monogamous resources. That's all I have for now. Please be sure to like, subscribe, comment, and share the video. Take care until next time.